So recently, Persona 5 Strikers has gotten its Western release. Now you guys might be asking yourselves, why am I saying Western release? Well, the reason is, if you guys are newcomers to the Persona franchise, it's because the Persona games are from Japan and they take around a year to get its full English translation. This game originally came out last year in February 20th to Japan, and we finally got it in February 23rd, I believe, of this year. So at first I was a bit skeptical of this game because, it's a whole different gameplay style, and I played Persona 5 Royal last year, which really, it was the game of the year for me personally last year. I know I didn't make a vid on it because it was months later that I picked up Persona 5 because I actually ended up playing Persona 4 during summer, and I absolutely loved the game. I poured like 160 hours easily in that game, and with Persona 5 Royal, I basically gave away my whole life and put, I think, 215 hours. Yeah, it's crazy. It's a very, very cool game. Easily one of my favorite games of all time, and it's possibly my favorite PlayStation 4 exclusive game ever. But anyway, returning to Persona 5 Strikers, I was a bit skeptical with this game because, as you can tell, with Persona 5, the whole gameplay was JRPG-ish, and it made it more of a laid-back experience, which is a huge pro considering how story-driven this game is, and it flexes its muscles when it comes to story writing. I think anybody can agree that the social link aspect of Persona 5 Royal was easily one of the best mechanics of all time. It's amazing. You can interact with these characters or side characters with different ways. You can unlock powers with them and stuff like that, and you can learn more about these characters, which makes the trip worthwhile. They are great, strong characters that are introduced. Even little tiny side characters that aren't that focused in the story are still great characters. And also, one of the biggest fears that I had for Persona 5 Strikers was that it would be more gameplay centered and it would abandon the story. And I was very skeptical, as I was saying, but at the same time interested with what they were going to do with Persona 5 Strikers. I felt like it could have been more gameplay focused and less story focused, but boy oh boy was I completely wrong. Persona 5 Strikers is around 40 hours long. That's what it took me. Actually, it took me around 43 hours to beat the game because I grinded just a tiny bit, and yeah, it's already half the length of Persona 5. At first, this game can be a little bit hard for people who are used to the Persona JRPG style and haven't really played that many hack and slash games, but once you get through the first half of the game gets way easier. The first half for me was a little bit shaky since, I was getting used to the gameplay mechanics in here, and the gameplay you see here is fully captured by me. It could seem like it sucks a little bit because this was like very, very early phase in the game, and I got more used to it like around the second half, as I was mentioning earlier. But the first half of the game can be a bit brutal for some people. Mostly for me, I actually died sometimes and these mini bosses, which I will say they kick my ass in this thing. But as I was saying, the second half of the game gets a lot easier since you're introduced to more items and you're more OP. But yeah, the gameplay has this Dynasty Warriors hack and slash-esque inspired gameplay mechanic, which, to be honest, it was actually very fun when I was playing this game, and it was actually very interesting fusing Persona elements and fusing Dynasty Warrior-esque elements. It's actually pretty cool. How the gameplay works, as you can see in the screen, is that you can switch characters. You can, for example, if I were to switch Joker to Ryuji, I could switch Ryuji to Makoto. It works as a baton pass system that was introduced in Persona 5, which instead of, like getting for example, if you weaken an enemy and then you can pass the baton, instead you can pass your baton infinitely whenever you want to pass the baton, which I actually really like because I really wanted to try out everybody in the squad. Because I was actually wondering when I was playing the game, I was like, how are they going to, to switch characters and all that stuff? Like, is it going to be like the baton system like in P5? And thankfully, it gives time for everybody. If Joker dies, you thankfully don't have to restart the entire battle, which I know was annoying for some people when they were playing Persona 5. But yeah, it's very cool that you could play as everybody here. It feels weird for some people since you could really like attack enemies and dodge a lot of attacks, which obviously in a JRPG game, it depends on good RNG, and if you have like great skills and your personas has like a great agility and stuff like that, luck and a lot of other factors that contribute to your persona. But yeah, thankfully here you could do it manually, and it feels weird, but at the same time it feels so great to miss the amount of attacks from these big ass bosses that could easily one-shot you. The showtimes in this game are definitely different compared to Persona 5 Royal. Persona 5 Royal had this showtime mechanic. I don't know if some of you maybe didn't play Persona 5 Royal or maybe are just used to Persona 5, but in Persona 5 Royal you had this little like special attack called showtime, which some characters could have, and it was actually like a very cool little cutscene when when you already had a party member equipped, let's say Ryuji and Yusuke, if you had like Ryuji equipped in the battlefield, sometimes randomly you could summon the Showtime. It would play this cutscene that will like unleash this huge attack, that would do a lot of damage. I'm actually happy that they, decided to put this mechanic in Persona 5 Strikers. It's definitely less stylish than in Persona 5 Royal. I definitely prefer Persona 5 Royal Showtimes more than these Showtimes, but either way, it's still pretty cool. Another thing for Persona 5 Strikers is that it's a more linear game. The days don't go by as quickly as in Persona 5, which in Persona 5, it was mostly all about time management, and you had to, know the activities you're going to do and all that stuff, think wisely, because there would be a deadline. But thankfully for this game, you're not that rushed with it. I liked that little deadline mechanic. I thought it made the game more intense and just funner because it was more realistic. I can clearly understand why they removed the deadline feature, since they want to make the game more accessible for really anybody. Another thing from the game is the removal of the social link system, which I kind of saw it coming already. I can understand why they didn't implement the social link system here, because they wanted to make this game, not that long compared to Persona 5. They wanted to make it more of an average length time, which 40 hours, with the main story alone is quite enough of material. And I haven't really touched that many of the requests or side missions or just done a lot of stuff around the world, which I will do in my second playthrough. But anyway, I could clearly see why there was any social link. They wanted to focus more on the main story, and even though it's a shame for some players like me, it's still understandable considering how this game is mostly a spin-off game and doesn't really want to focus that much on making characters super in-depth, since they just want to have a fun time with it. So in Persona 5 Strikers, instead of palaces like we had in Persona 5, we now have something called jails. Now jails are a much wider space for the players, since you can traverse freely at your own pace like you could with palaces, but I think it's a much wider area and there's more things you could do in jails. With the palaces, we all know that it was created by people who had distorted hearts or distorted visions, and obviously the whole purpose of the game was to take away the hearts of these corrupted people who had palaces, and to bring them back to their senses and make them confess their crimes. But now with Persona 5 Strikers, we have something called jails, which are ruled by monarchs. Monarchs are similar to, the leaders in the palaces, but with a slight change. These monarchs can now brainwash people. They can brainwash the cognition of people, and they can affect their real life habits. Thing is that the monarchs are changing the hearts of people. As I was saying earlier, they were brainwashing them. They are making them like their fans, like their own slaves, basically. And how they are brainwashing these people are by sealing their desires, which I like that in the game they materialize this thing and they make it a jewel, which, is describing how precious a desire can be. Similar to how in Persona 5, the treasures of the palace rulers were actually their hearts. I want to talk more about the story of this game, since Persona 5 had an amazing story, and this game has actually a pretty great story as well. The story is basically that there have been several cases around Japan that there's something similar to the change of heart epidemic is going on, but this time people are being manipulated. Instead of the phantom thieves, when they change people's heart, they make them confess all the crimes and stuff like that. Instead of this time, the people are just being used for personal gain, and it's up to the phantom thieves to put an end to this with a little help of these new characters called Zenkichi and Sophie. Now let's talk first about Zenkichi. Zenkichi for me is possibly the best new character compared to Sophie. I just personally like Zenkichi's character. I like his detective-esque type of character. I like how comical his character is and how serious he can get at some times. He's a well-written character, and as the story progresses, you get to learn more things about him, and I think that just makes the character just more lovable, really, as he really reminds me of Soji, more of like a father role model type of person looking after the phantom thieves. The other character, who is Sophie, which is an AI actually, and is called humanity's companion. No joke, that's what she calls herself. It's a pretty interesting character, but I personally didn't like the voice acting. It felt like a generic anime English dub character with too much of a high-pitched voice. That thing kind of became annoying for me. Personally, I just didn't like it. It came very annoying quickly throughout the course of the game, mostly the last half of the game. But yeah, overall, I think her character is interesting since it's an AI learning about the human hearts, and she wants to do her best, to please humanity and to become humanity's companion and not be totally worthless, which I personally think is a very interesting concept. I mean, an AI being humanized is actually a very cool and interesting concept, mostly for a Persona game. I'm gonna say it right off the bat, the antagonist of this game game is just very predictable, and I just didn't like that much about the game. I was calling shots about the antagonist so early in the game, you know, and it was so obvious who it was. I'm not gonna say who it was. I'm not gonna spoil anything. I'm not gonna say, you know, at this point or at this many hours in the game you'll encounter this person, but it's so obvious who it is. I won't say it, but it's so obvious. I wish it made it less obvious and all. But I would say this character is actually pretty cool. I like this character, you know. It's I wouldn't say it's different because it's a huge hint that's been spread over like Persona 4 and Persona 5, which is very noticeable hint. I won't say what it is, but I think people who've played the Persona games can easily guess who the villain is. And even though I knew who the villain is right off the bat, I still enjoyed the character for what it was. Really, in the end game portion, I think this person shines the most. Now I want to talk about the monarchs of this game, you know, the sort of palace leaders that they are in this game. I'm just gonna say it flat out. These characters are sort of copy pasted characters from Persona 5. Now I'm not saying that as a bad thing. Even though it sort of is copy pasted, there is a little twist to it, and it doesn't make it super carbon copy. At least, you know, there's something great about this character, some great features about these characters that make them stand up and be a little bit unique. But it's still pretty obvious who they are replicating. Now, for one of my favorite things about the Persona franchise, which you guys know I'm a huge music fan. Persona franchise has had this very big reputation of having amazing music, mostly with Persona 3 and up. I'm not saying Persona 1 and Persona 2 didn't have great music, but they're mostly known for Persona 3 and up, which have these classic cult hits. Persona 5, everybody knows. At this point, almost everybody knows the soundtrack of Persona 5. Beneath the Mask, such a chill, laid-back song that plays around when you're crusading throughout the city at night. And also, who can forget the iconic battle theme, Last Suprise, which shocked everybody throughout the internet. I remember having that song on repeat when it first came out. Like, that song was a banger. It's a bop. Every time that song pops up, I sometimes just have to stop, like, doing the battle. Or if I'm doing the battle, I'm just gonna be jamming mostly to the song, like, while playing, which is amazing. You know, it's an amazing combination. Now, how does the soundtrack in Persona 5 Strikers hold up? Now, most of the soundtrack for Persona 5 Strikers is sort of a remix of Persona 5. It has some of these songs have a more EDM type of version. Some of them have a rock and roll version. The Last Surprise has a rock version, which I actually found it very enjoyable. Found that it was very, you know, energizing throughout the game. There is a new battle theme called Daredevil, which I have it on repeat. It is an amazing song. It's this rock infused song added with these little hits, these little strings, keeping it like the little Persona 5S type of vibe. What I also really like about the soundtrack is that even with these new pieces of soundtrack, we still get to hear this Persona 5 type of theme. Some songs have this more of laid-back aesthetic. If when you're crusading around the cities, you hear more this tropical beach type of vibe, but it still sounds Persona-esque, if you know what I mean. Sometimes when you go to battle, these chords that play, these sort of like Rhodes instrumental, give you a sense of nostalgia of Persona 5, which I absolutely adore. I love Shoji Megura's music. He is such a great composer. I think he signed with Atlus or something. But ever since he's made soundtracks for Persona 3, Persona 4, Persona 5, it's always been a hit. I've always loved his soundtrack. It is amazing. The OP for this game is actually pretty cool. I really like it. Even though it's not as great as Wake Up, Get Up, Get Out There, which will always be a classic in my heart, it's still a great OP. And also Lynn on the vocals, it's a fantastic thing. It's so great. You know, I know this is strange. I know this is weird, but it just reminds me of Freddie Gibbs when he recollapsed Madlib. I know they're two different completely, you know, artists and all that stuff, but either way, it always reminds me, you know, just the two-headed goat. Also, another thing for the story that I want to point out, the last thing about the story, is mostly about the message and themes displayed in this game. In Persona 4, it was mostly about believing yourself and all that stuff, which was the way of getting your persona, aka your true self. But in Persona 5, it's mostly about overcoming, you know, your struggles and all that stuff and pushing on, believing in yourself in a nutshell. In this game, it carries on that type of message as well, but it's also, you know, talking about, you know, the human desires and stuff, and how the human desires is what makes humans in a nutshell, and how you should value your desires and how you should protect your desires, and also that you should overcome your own problems by yourself. I think was a very nice message in the story. Also, another thing I want to point out about the gameplay aspect that I just remembered was boss battles that I personally thought were a little bit underwhelming sometimes. I think during the first course of the game, it was tougher, obviously, because I was getting used to it. But during the second half, and mostly the final boss, it just came to the point where it was just too simplistic and a bit too easy. Now, keep in mind that I was playing in a normal difficulty. I personally thought that Persona 5 had a perfect ending, and I didn't really think a sequel to that game was very necessary. I still think the sort of spin-off is actually a pretty cool sequel to the game. While this game isn't perfect, I still think this game is still pretty cool. Even for a spin-off game, it's actually quite impressive. Now, what will I give Persona 5 Strikers? I will give this game an 8 out of 10. I think Atlus did a great thing with this game. I love how they treated the game. I like how this isn't really a cash grab type of game. It's a game that has 40 hours of gameplay with its main story itself. I haven't completed everything for this game, so I might get the platinum trophy for this game, who knows. But I love that there's detail to this game. It's polished. It doesn't feel like a cash grab type of game. You know, it feels complete in a nutshell. It doesn't feel like they're trying to milk off the Persona franchise like they did with other Persona games. This game feels complete, and this game feels like it's mostly for the fans. And for newcomers, this is still a pretty fun game for you guys as well. I highly recommend this game for anybody, really. Mostly for Persona fans who just want to see the Phantom Thieves in action one last time. But yeah, what do you guys think about this game? Do you guys love it? Do you guys hate it? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, see you guys next time. Peace out and stay safe from COVID.
Over time they erode and destroy hearts.